Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. In this video, I'm going to attempt to explain everything you need to know about the new armor and gear system in The Edge of Fate, based on my early capture preview that I just attended at Bungie HQ. Before we get started, there are two caveats I need to mention. Number one, it was an early preview event, which means that the content in the game is obviously subject to change if the devs are still working on it. And number two, I'm still familiarizing myself with all these systems just like you guys are, so I'm going to do my absolute best to be accurate here, but there may be some areas where I've not got full context about how a system works just yet, and in that case, if I make a mistake, then I obviously apologize. Let's start off with the new tiers system. So gear will now drop at different tiers, starting at the lowest tier, tier 1, and going up all the way to tier 5, which will be the hardest ones to obtain. The first difference to focus on between the lower tiers and the higher tiers is the total stat roll that you can get for the piece of gear. So as you can see in this screenshot here, tier 1s will have a total stat distribution between 48 and 53, tier 2 53 to 58, etc. Now we'll worry about the high tier stuff in a minute because there's a bunch of extra things there that get much more complex, but just to begin with, what exactly is the new stat distribution system? Because that is different to everything we've seen before in Destiny. So currently, you've got your top 3 stats and your bottom 3 stats. Those roll separately to one another, and you always end up with a sort of rough spread of things across all the stats. Like, it's very rare to get a 0 in any slot. Whereas now, they're changing stat distributions to be much spikier, and what that means in practice is you get 3 spikes. You get a primary spike, a secondary spike, and then a third random spike. Now you're wondering why I'm calling it a third random one. The reason is that the first 2 are actually determined by what archetype the armor is. So you can see when I hover over a piece of armor, just like I'm doing here, right next to its power, you can see a symbol which actually has 2 stat icons in it. That's what the icon is made up of, and then it's got a name. So Bulwark, for example, has the stat icon for health on the top and class below it. Gunner has weapons at the top and grenade at the bottom, and we'll talk more about what the different stats are in a second because those have changed as well. Specialist has class at the top and weapons below it, etc. I'll have them on screen right now, but the key takeaway for you is that the top icon here is whatever your primary role is going to be, and the bottom one is your secondary role. And like I said, your third stat spike will be a random roll, and that will be your lowest one. Now, we mentioned that at the low tiers, you're around 50 total stat distribution. That means that your 3 spikes all together will add up to around 50. And typically, in my experience, this usually means that you have a primary spike that's fairly close to 30, and then your other 2 spikes will each add up to fill the remainder to get you to your total roll. So maybe it's 50 total, maybe you get 29 on your primary stat, 15 on your secondary stat, and 6 on your third random roll. Something like that. But as I showed you before, as you go up the weapon tiers, you're going to get closer and closer to the highest possible roll. The absolute max total you can get for your base stat distribution is 75. That's the tier 5, 73 to 75 range. And if you get a perfect 75 roll, then first of all, congratulations. That's going to be pretty hard to come by. But in that scenario, that's going to mean that your stat distribution will always, I think, look like this. 30 in your primary slot, 25 in your secondary slot, and then 20 in your random roll. You'll never have like 40 in your primary slot and then less in the others. Like, it will always drop 30, 25, 20. But, of course, this is Destiny, and there are ways to get your stats boosted even higher. So let's take another look at this image, which shows us the different tiers. We can see here that stat tuning is present. Now, that's separate to masterworking, which has also changed, and we'll talk about in a moment. But first, let's just focus on tuning. So tuning is only present for tier 5 armor. And by the way, if you're wondering how to get tier 5s, I've got other videos on that on my channel. Click over to the channel, you'll see them there. They're going to be linked in the description as well. But yeah, assuming you've got yourself a tier 5, the first difference you'll notice is that there's a very small 3-line icon next to one of the stats when you hover over your tier 5, and that is the stat that your drop is tuned to. This is totally random as far as I understand it, so it's not linked to the archetype that you've got on that armor. It's not linked to what your random roll is. It's just a totally random stat. And this stat is relevant when you go into that armor's mods and you see this mod slot. The majority of the mods here are going to allow you to increase your tuned stat at the cost of losing some stat points somewhere else. And it will always be a +5, -5 situation. So it won't affect your overall stat distribution. You'll always have the same number because you're basically taking away from one stat to add to your tuned stat. But there's one exception to this. On the far left-hand side of the tuned slot mods, you actually have an option for balanced tuning. And what that does is it adds +1 to all of your lowest stats on your armor. So if we think back to what I said before, you have your primary, secondary, and then your random rolls on your stats. The other 3 are all 0. So what balanced tuning does is it brings all of those zeros up to 1. You get +1, +1, +1. And this doesn't have a cost. So this means that technically you're actually getting 3 stat points here for free. And that means that when we were talking before about your overall stat distribution, it's 75 max when you've got a tier 5, but with this tuning slot, if you go balanced, you can bring it up to 78. But that's not the only way that you can increase your stat distribution, because as you guys know from current Destiny, you can add a mod to give yourself +10 in a given stat. So that means that rather than being at 78 as our total, we actually bump that up to 88. But then on top of that, like I mentioned before, we've still got masterworking, but masterworking has changed a bit. So now when you're getting something up to max masterwork, what it's going to do is it's going to add +5 to each of your 3 lowest stats on that armor. And so, similar to how balanced tuning works, that's always going to be the 3 stats that don't show up as either your primary, secondary, or random roll. And that means that total, we're adding +15 to your overall stat distribution. So from 88, we're going to 103 as your overall max. But if you just choose to tune to a specific stat instead of doing balanced tuning, then your max would be your 75 base plus your 10 from a mod slot, that's 85, plus your 15 from masterworking, that's 100, and then the tuning would just give you +5 somewhere, but -5 somewhere else. So you would stick at a nice and clean 100. So those are the stats, but what do all the new stats do? Because those have changed, like I said, right? And where do set bonuses come into the picture? And don't worry, we'll talk about the set bonuses in a second, but first let's just focus on the stats themselves. Stats now are broken down into 2 halves. The first 100 points you spec into a stat is its base effect, and then from the 100 point all the way up to 200, you can spec into getting an enhanced benefit, and that benefit will only kick in once you're over 100. So let's run through all the stats now, and I'll tell you their base effect and their enhanced benefit. Health, base ability, increases the amount of health you gain each time you pick up an orb of power, and reduces flinching from incoming fire while aiming a weapon. At max, you'll get 70 health per orb and 10% flinch resistance. And the health enhanced benefit is your shields recharge more quickly and have additional health when facing combatants. Next, class. Its base stat is it reduces your class ability cooldown and increases the amount of class ability energy provided by all sources. And at max, that's going to mean that you'll get about plus 185% of class ability energy. And the enhanced benefit is you gain an overshield when you use your class ability. And the strength of that overshield correlates to how far into the stat you've spec'd. So if you scale in about 25 points over the 100 mark, that's going to give you about 10 points of overshield health. For the weapons stat, the base abilities are increases weapon reload speed and handling, and increases weapon damage against minor and major combatants. At max, that's going to look like about 10% of reload and handling boost, and 15% damage boost against those minor and major combatants. Its enhanced ability is ammo bricks from defeated targets have a chance to contain additional rounds, and increases weapon damage against bosses and opposing guardians. When you fully scale into this, you can get up to 100% extra large ammo brick chance, and then for the damage damage against bosses, in PvE, the primary and special damage boost goes up to about 15%, and your heavy weapon damage boost will be about 9 to 10%. But in PvP against other guardians, your primary, special, and heavy will all have a max boost of about 6%. But that's only if you fully scale into the weapon stat, obviously. If you've got less in the weapon stat, so you're only at like 120 instead of 186, then you'll have much lower numbers. For super, the base ability increases the amount of super energy from all sources, and the enhanced ability increases the damage done by your super. For grenade, its base ability reduces your grenade ability cooldown and increases the amount of grenade energy from all sources. At max, I think this gives you about plus 150% grenade energy, and the enhanced benefit increases the damage done by your grenades. For melee, its base ability reduces your melee cooldown and increases the amount of melee energy from all sources, and the enhanced benefit increases the damage done by your melee attacks. So those are all the new stats, but what are the implications that those are going to have on your build crafting? Well, like I just said, you can get either 100 or 103 as your max stats on any given piece of gear, but if we remember, only 30 out of your 75 base stats are going to go into your primary stat roll. And that means that, let's say you've got a particular stat that you really want to chase and push all the way to 200. In order to do that, you're going to need to get that primary roll on all your pieces of gear, and that would give you 30 times 5, so 150 in your primary stat that you're trying to boost. And then if you also put on a mod to get plus 10 to that stat on each of those pieces of gear, that could get you to 200. But what that would mean is you'd be speccing into the exact same armor archetype on every single thing, because if you're always getting the same primary stat roll, that means you're also always going to be getting the same secondary stat roll, as far as I understand it. I don't think there are any scenarios where you have archetypes with the same primary stat but different secondary stats. I just haven't seen that yet so far. But that means that you will not only have your 150 from all those primary stats, but you'll also have 5 times 25 from your secondary stats. And that'll mean that you'll definitely have 125 in whatever your secondary stat is. And so that would then just leave your random rolls to fill out some of the other stats, and also any tuning if you want to switch things around a little bit there as well. But there's definitely no world where you get 200 on every stat, right? Or like right now, people will have a couple of stats that they really focus on. Like as a warlock, I'm really focused on my resil and my dis and stuff like that, but I don't really care about my int or my bill, for example. And getting triple 100s is usually the sign of a really well put together stat distribution, or at least I think, if I recall correctly. But now, I don't think it's possible anymore to get max stats in 3 separate stats. Like, you can't get 200, 200, 200. There's just not enough stat points to go around. And another way to sort of visualize this so you can understand what I'm saying here is that in the new system, if you do balanced tuning on all of your armor and you only equip legendaries, that's 103 per slot, and obviously it's 5 slots, so that's a total possible stat distribution of 515. But realistically, most people are going to run an exotic. And exotics are a little different because, as far as I've seen so far, they don't drop with tuning, because exotics are not at tier 5, they're just equivalent or similar to tier 5. But because they don't have the tuning that tier 5 comes with, that means that you can't add that balanced tuning to them, and so you're stuck with just your 75 base, plus your 15 from masterworking and your 10 from a mod slot, meaning that exotics can only give you 100 stat points, and that means it's 103 times 4 for 412, plus your 100 from your exotic for 512 total stat points. And those 512 will obviously never give you 200, 200, 200, like you can get 100, 100, 100 in your preferred stats now. Now, there's another detail relating to gear at tier 5, which you might have noticed if you're very eagle-eyed, and that's that normally in Destiny 2, we have 10 energy points to spend on armor mods, but if you're at tier 5, you're going to get 11 energy points for that particular piece of armor to spend on your desired mods. And this will mean that you have slightly more flexibility to really squeeze as much out of the mods system as you possibly can if you've got that highest tier gear. So that's a lot of information, right? But we haven't yet talked about set bonuses. Now, I'm only allowed to tell you about specific set bonuses. There are more than the following set bonuses in the game, but I'm just limited on what I am and am not allowed to share based on it being a preview event and the devs still working on the content. But before we talk about the individual effects that they have, let's just talk about what they are. So armor sets are a totally new system, and they work very uniformly by either giving you a bonus if you've got 2 items from the same set equipped, or 4 items from the same set. And exotics do not have an armor set, or at least not that I've seen so far. So that means that of your 4 other pieces of gear, excluding your exotic, they all need to be in the exact same set if you want the 4-piece bonus, or you can mix and match 2 sets and get 2 2-piece bonuses. Each set bonus kind of has a slant towards a playstyle of some description, and honestly, I think the best way to give you some flavor about them is to just read through them now. So the first set is Bushido. Its 2-piece bonus, Aido, don't know how you pronounce that, means that final blows with freshly drawn or reloaded weapons heal you, and its 4-piece bonus, Unfaltering Focus, means that bow, shotgun, or sword final blows temporarily reduce incoming damage. Also, damaging targets with those weapons extends the effect. So you can kind of visualize a playstyle that this would suit, right? Your 2-piece bonus means that you're freshly drawing stuff constantly, and your 4-piece bonus means that those specific weapon types are going to reduce your incoming damage. So this would really work effectively if you were constantly swapping between a shotgun and a sword, for example, getting final blows to extend your damage reduction, and then switching over to the other weapon to heal yourself and sustain even more, and you would just continuously keep juggling that to keep the bonuses active. The next set is Aeon Renewal. The 2-piece bonus for this is Force Converter. After a final blow with any rocket or grenade launcher, sprint for a short time to gain speed booster, and the 4-piece bonus is Reactive Booster. Once per activation of Force Converter, the 2-piece bonus, sprinting while at critical health, being suspended, or being slowed by a stasis effect will immediately grant speed booster for a short duration. So your sort of playstyle for this is obviously based on your rocket or grenade launcher, and you can basically use it to be much more maneuverable and get out of scenarios where you're suspended and slowed, etc. The next set is TechSec, and its 2-piece bonus is Wrecker, where you deal significantly increased kinetic damage to combatant shields, overshields, vehicles, and constructs. Constructs include barricades, turrets, stasis crystals, and other objects created in the field, and its 4-piece bonus is Concussive Rounds, where defeating powerful combatants or breaking a combatant shield with kinetic damage releases a disorienting kinetic shockwave. The playstyle I could imagine for this is when you're using maybe a kinetic exotic or something like that, so it's still something that's got pretty good DPS. And I think it could also be a scenario where you switch to a kinetic weapon just to do the last little bit of damage on a powerful combatant, and that way you get the disorienting kinetic shockwave, and you can then switch back to your other weapons to do more damage, and then switch back to this just for the final blows. So those are sets, and each set, I believe, corresponds to a different source activity type. So you'll have sets that you'll earn from specific raids, sets that you'll earn from specific activities, sets from trials, like etc. And that, I think, will motivate you to play some of the different modes and activities available in the game. But it's important to note that exotics, as far as I've seen, do not have sets, like I mentioned before, because instead of having a set bonus at the bottom of their inspect screen, they've got their exotic armor perks. Now, maybe this will change. Maybe in the raid, you'll get your exotic armor perk, and then you'll also get the raid-specific set bonus down there as well. But personally, I think that's quite unlikely, just because I think Bungie wants there to be a trade-off where you get the benefit of a really cool exotic, but that means that you have to be smarter about how you spec into your sets in your other armor slots. So that's all well and good, but there's a significant elephant in the room here, which is how you get the tier 5s in the first place, right? Like, I've based so much of this video on you already being able to get them, but where do they come from? And the answer to that is a little bit more fiddly. I'll give you a much shorter explanation of that now, but if you want the more meaty explanation, I'll point you in the right direction for that in just a second. The short answer is that tier 5s will only drop when you're in the portal and you have a combination of a high enough metal rating and a high enough letter rating. So once you get to 400 plus power, which will be 200 persistent power and then 200 from seasonal, you'll then be high enough where if you whack on enough challenge modifiers inside the portal, you'll be able to earn tier 5s. Or once you get even further to 450 power or 500 power, you'll then have to whack on slightly fewer challenge modifiers and you'll still be able to earn tier 5s. But you will not be able to earn them if your power is too low, and that incentivizes you to grind up the power curve in any given season past the persistent power and pretty far into the seasonal power, and it's only then that those drops will start dropping. There's one extra thing to mention that I just remembered to squeeze in here, and that's that there's also now seasonal buffs to new armor which expire at the end of the season that armor released in. So if you equip full armor that all released in Season of Reclamation, and you're playing the game during Season of Reclamation, if you then hover your artifact, you'll see that it can tell you've got 5 out of 5 armor pieces equipped from the current season pool, and that means that they're all new gear, and that means you get a 7.8% damage resistance buff. And that means that if you then kept all that gear on, and you just moved into Season of the Lawless, you would no longer have quote-unquote new gear equipped, because it would be gear from a previous season, and you'd therefore no longer have your damage resistance buff. And this is a mechanic encouraging you to grind for whatever the current season's new gear is for both weapons and armor. But if that sounds confusing and you're unsure what metal ratings are and the difficulties and what the challenge modifiers look like now, then I've got a full dedicated video talking about the portal and explaining the new power curve on the left-hand side here. And on the right-hand side, you're probably wondering how the weapons work, because there's tier 5 weapons now as well, and that's all explained in the video on the right-hand side. So click through to one of those now, and I'll see you there. Bye for now.